All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope your break is off to a good start and you're enjoying yourself. What we're going to do today is we're going to start with our first spring break screencast, and we're going to take a look at the second Red Scare. So as we go through the second Red Scare, what I want you guys to keep in mind are some of the major events taking place. Why is it happening? The effects of it. We're going to kind of go through all the different aspects of the second Red Scare. But also I want you to be able to compare it to the first Red Scare. So what's similar about what caused it? Who are they targeting and why? Are there different targets in the second Red Scare versus the first Red Scare? So as we go through this stuff, try and think of the similarities, and we'll try and pull out some of the major differences. So when you think about this era, the first thing you have to do is to kind of put it into historical context. So this is the Cold War era, and it's going to last. The second Red Scare is going to last from 1945 to 1955. So I put up, I don't know if you guys know who James Bond is, but the famous James Bond movies, they're set in like a Cold War era and this era of espionage. What Americans are nervous about after the Second World War, the Soviet Union emerges as our great, large enemy in the world, and the spread of communism is kind of a major fear. So what we're going to look at today is the effect of that domestically. We've been talking about Harry Truman, the Truman Doctrine, the policy of containment, trying to stop the spread of communism. The Berlin airlift happens, the Korean War, China becomes communist. So this is on Americans' minds. They're fearful of the spread of communism. It's like these famous movies, like the James Bond movies. They're set with that backdrop, that Cold War backdrop. Same thing with this famous cartoon. I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen this cartoon, Spy versus Spy, but this is supposed to be kind of like a Cold War era situation where the Soviets are trying to spy on us and we're trying to spy on the Soviets. This is important to understand because this sets the backdrop for the second Red Scare. The American government is trying to contain communism around the world. Within the country, Americans, the American government, the American people start to become very nervous of communists living amongst us. Communists who are trying to spread their ideology in America, infiltrate American society, pass secrets to the Soviet Union, steal atomic secrets from the United States, and basically have subversive intentions within the United States. So this becomes like a permeating, basically, fear within the United States. So the second Red Scare is about Americans being fearful of kind of communist infiltration within America. Now, because of this, you're going to see different levels of the American government trying to combat communists within American society. What they're worried about are people who have communist leanings, who might have, communist backgrounds in powerful positions in America. So in the government, in the media, in Hollywood, places where they can influence people. So the American government on the national level, the state level, and the local level is going to try and combat communists within the government. And they set up programs to try and find these people within the United States. So on the federal level, this is actually formed before World War II starts, the House Committee on Un-American Activities. It's commonly known as the Dies Committee, after the guy who creates it, Martin Dies. Created in 1938. Now, when you look at the date, it should make you realize that the original intention of who they're targeting is not communists. Okay, it's pre-World War II. So it's originally trying to find fascists in America, Nazi sympathizers in America, Mussolini sympathizers in America. That's what they're originally trying to investigate and find, if they could find these people within the United States. But after the war ends, it morphs. It morphs into trying to find communists within the country, because our major enemy shifts from fascism to communism. Now, I think an interesting element of some of the groups that get targeted within American society is Hollywood. So you might say, like, why are people, or why is the government investigating Hollywood to see if there's any known communists in Hollywood? Well, the reason that they're investigating them is because the movies is really like America's major form of entertainment at the time. I believe your textbook says like about 90 million movie tickets are bought each week, or the equivalent of that. And so you have tremendous amount of people going to the movies on a weekly basis. And so they can really influence people. And they were very worried that communists kind of leaned to the left, that leaned, towards maybe like more socialist, communist thinking. And so they started to investigate people. Now, I find this kind of interesting. Two of our future presidents are involved in this on different sides of the investigations. You have Richard Nixon here and Ronald Reagan here. Ronald Reagan's a big movie star. Richard Nixon is a young congressman, and he actually is going to question Ronald Reagan. So we don't know at the time that both of them are going to be presidents of the United States, but they're on different sides of the coin here. And really what they're doing is they're kind of going after Hollywood to see if they are, trying to kind of subvertly influence America towards like a more communist mentality. And this group, the Hollywood 10, they actually end up going to jail. So these are Hollywood actors and directors that end up going to jail because they won't really kind of explain their connections that they've had in the past. And so you have other committees out there that start to form in Congress. Another one is called the McCarran Committe. And one of the big things that they wanted to do when they investigate not only Hollywood, but anybody that they bring before these committees, what they're doing is what they're worried about is Soviet spy rings in the United States. Okay, so they're worried about not just, they think, kind of one person they're not working alone. They have other connections within the country, and it's kind of like a ring, and it connects back to the Soviet Union. And so what they want people to do when they come before the committees is not just admit their own guilt, but then also tell them who they're working with. So in the modern age, it makes me think of like terrorist cells. Some of the hardest terrorists to capture and to understand what they're doing is they call them lone wolf terrorists because they don't work with anyone. Terrorists who are a part of a group, a cell, it's usually easier to unravel what they're doing because they have communication with other people. They might be linked to a larger group like ISIS or Al Qaeda or one of these international terrorist groups. So Americans at the time believed that these Soviet spies working in the United States, they're linked to like these larger spy rings, and if they can unravel them, they can kind of deconstruct these spy rings. Now, things around the world are making Americans more and more nervous about communist infiltration in America. You have major revolutions happening. So Mao Zedong takes power in China. You have the Korean War breakout. Stalin is influencing Eastern Europe. So this becomes like a sentiment in America. A red is a communist. And, being called a red or being labeled a red or a communist in this time period is basically calling somebody un-American. You're un-American. You're anti-American. You don't stand for American values and beliefs. You're essentially a traitor. Okay, and this kind of becomes like, an awful label to be given during the time period. It could ruin your political career. It could ruin your professional career. Is only just getting labeled a communist can ruin your career. And so you have the governments on 3 levels: on the national level, on the state level, and the local level, actually going out there trying to find people who are even just associated with communism on maybe like a local level, and to infiltrate and try and expose that to the public. Now, the issue here is that there actually are some real spies in the United States, okay? So whenever you have this level of hysteria, or this kind of, in this case, hysteria about communism, usually the issue is that there's a grain of truth behind it. And in this case, it's definitely true. You have some real spies working for the Soviet Union, or, trying to steal secrets from the United States, working in the American government and stealing documents. So Whittaker Chambers is a good example of this. So Whittaker Chambers is kind of like a low-level spy, and he steals some government documents. And it kind of starts to unravel a small spy ring. Another guy that's associated with him is this guy Alger Hiss, who's also kind of been accused, and they get convicted of stealing documents, and kind of eventually they realize years later that they actually did sell some secrets to the Soviet Union and give the Soviet Union some secrets about the American government. Whether it was anything major or like super important, at the time is not really too relevant. The fact that they're doing it is making people, uncomfortable. Some other guys who are caught as far as being basically Soviet spies. This guy Klaus Fuchs sells atomic secrets. So talk about a major spy, somebody selling basically atomic energy secrets about how he built the atomic bomb, gives this to the Soviet Union. So huge spy. These guys become famous, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They are Julius Rosenberg is basically, nobody really disputes that he was a spy for the Soviet Union. His wife, Ethel Rosenberg, there's a little bit of dispute about whether or not she actually was a spy or not. They actually end up, getting the death penalty for being traitors to the United States. And so this, I think, is important to understand. There is an element of truth in some of this, okay? There are real Soviet spies. The Soviet Union is actively trying to steal secrets from the United States, and we're doing the same thing to the Soviet Union. So there is an element of truth here. The thing is that it turns into massive programs, and in certain cases, kind of a hysteria and kind of an anti-communist hysteria within the United States. So on your state level, and in the federal government and your state level, what they're going to institute are these things called loyalty programs. So they would investigate, the federal government investigated every single employee of the federal government. A lot of state governments would do the same thing. They'd investigate every employee, and they'd check into your past. They'd interview people. They'd find out like the organizations you joined in college, what are you associated with. And if they found anything that they felt was disloyal to the United States, potentially a communist group that you had joined, or not even something that's actively communist, just something that they might associate with being communist, you could lose your job. So this became very serious, and they wanted people to make these like loyalty pledges to the government and basically, agree that they had never joined a communist party or been associated with the Communist Party. So during this time period, this is kind of the element that you're dealing with. So in a lot of cases, they would target, like in this case, with loyalty programs, you see college professors get targeted. You see teachers can get targeted. Think about it. What if a teacher teaches a lesson and students perceive it as kind of leaning towards more socialist or more communist? And this could, potentially happen. And so, like, you have this going on in the United States. And so you have average Americans. These are Americans. These are not foreigners who are being targeted throughout this Red Scare. It's basically Americans who are working for the government, working in Hollywood, working in positions where they can influence people that are being targeted as potentially, being communist or communist sympathizers. Okay. Now, when you look at the Second Red Scare, the person that most people associate the Second Red Scare with is a guy named Joseph McCarthy. Okay, and they actually are going to name kind of a whole, I guess, era or a whole kind of mindset after him called McCarthyism, which is kind of like his hysteria that he creates during the Second Red Scare. So he's a congressman, McCarthy, and he jumps onto the scene kind of in the middle of this. He jumps on the scene into like in the 1950s. He gives this speech in West Virginia, and basically in his speech, he just kind of calls out and says that he has this list of 205 communists. And then afterwards, he starts changing the numbers. He says, oh no, it's 57, then it's 81, 116. He's kind of like all over the place. But what he's doing is he's kind of just saying that, he knows who these communists are in the government. And he's going to help to weed them out. So he starts like his own investigations, McCarthy, to try and find people who are communists within the government. Now, there's a couple of things going on here that you have to understand. First thing is one aspect of this is a matter of politics, okay? The Republican Party is going to use, they call it red baiting, which means accusing their opponents of being communist as a tactic. Okay, so partially I think that's a little bit of what McCarthy is doing in the beginning, and other Republican congressmen and politicians do this. They might accuse their Democratic opponents of being communists, and they kind of link their liberal ideology. A lot of the New Deal, they link to it, of them being leaning to the left. Similar, like when we looked at the New Deal, like some of the critics of the New Deal say this is way too communist or way too, liberal. So they use this as a tactic to kind of basically ruin somebody's reputation, to try and help them win elections. And then also they do it as a way of kind of gaining power. Because if somebody calls you a communist in this era, it's basically out and outright calling you a traitor. So you are on the defensive. You have to defend yourself more than they have to kind of prove that their accusations are correct. It's kind of just guilt by just naming you, by throwing your name out there and saying you are a communist. So McCarthy, what this really is, this whole idea of McCarthyism, is that he's going to use this tactic of basically naming people and kind of creating a hysteria that he knows who communists are and they're infiltrating American society, and he has these lists and he'll name people who are communists. And he can ruin people's reputations just by naming them. Even if they can vindicate themselves and prove that they're not communists, he can kind of ruin their reputation. And so, he has these special meetings where he's going to kind of like, point out who he knows are communists within the country. So this is one of my favorite photographs, actually. I love this guy's expression right here and this woman's expression right here. McCarthy often got this from his colleagues. Like, a lot of his congressional colleagues just thought that he made no sense, that his accusations had no foundation to it. The problem is not that his fellow congressmen really are not on board with McCarthy and what McCarthy is doing. The public, though, is interested in what he's doing, because some of the people he accuses actually turn out to be communists, and so they are communist sympathizers, and it gives him like an air of credibility. And he takes that and he kind of runs with it a bit. Where he gets himself in trouble is he's going to accuse. This is George Marshall, the guy who came up with the Marshall Plan to try and save Europe from the spread of communism. He accuses George Marshall of being a communist, and a communist sympathizer and a Soviet sympathizer. And that takes it one step too far. But I think McCarthy, he's an important person, an important figure in American history, because it shows what can be done with a simple accusation and kind of a hysteria that's created within the United States, around, a particular label that you can get. Okay, so we're going to stop there for the second Red Scare. What you have to do is be able to compare this to the first Red Scare. So what is similar about it? What is different about it? Okay, they're both a little bit of fear against communism. The actions carried out are different. The targets who are targeted during the first and second Red Scare are different. The length of it is different. Why it happens is different. And what are the general fears are different during the time period. So you have to kind of be able to analyze that. So that's your task that goes along with this screencast. All right, we'll have a couple other screencasts to come, so I'll post them a little bit later in the week. Enjoy your vacation, and make sure you check back for some future screencasts.